Our presentation today will be going over inclusive education for elementary school students. My name is Aliana O'Neill. I'm currently a school psychology graduate student at Cal State Long Beach. So this is the agenda for the presentation today. So we'll be going over the goals for this training. We'll then go into some information about school teams. We'll discuss the topic of inclusion. After, we'll go over the least restrictive environment and what that pertains to. We'll go over the structure of inclusion programs as well as the benefits of those. And then we'll end with some common misconceptions and parent resources. The goal of this training for parents will be by the end of this training, you'll be educated and informed on what inclusive practices are. You'll be able to understand how inclusive practices may be implemented within an elementary school setting. You'll also be able to leave with some resources that could support your child and you. And then as a presenter, my goal is to answer any questions that you may have to address any unknowns. So before going into the chunk of the presentation, I wanted to share and take a moment to go over school team compositions. This shows the different team members that could be working with your child at school, very similar to an IEP team. The school team might consist of an administrator, most commonly a principal, a school psychologist, a general education teacher, special education teacher, related service providers such as speech and language pathologist, occupational therapist, possibly a counselor or a social worker, paraprofessionals, and then as a parent, you are a vital member of the school team. And knowing this information is important because as we discuss the concept of inclusive programs, these people could be great resources that can answer any specific questions, as well as help communicate possible feedback on your child's progress. If you're not sure about who your school team consists of, the first person that you can reach out to is your child's teacher, and they can point you in the right direction on learning a little bit more about what your team consists of. Moving into the topic of inclusion, this term could seem like a new term, but inclusive practices are embedded throughout our everyday life to include people from all abilities and backgrounds. So we can think of inclusion as accepting and including those with different perspectives, races, genders, and cultures than us. It can also be having quiet spaces for breaks, including closed captioning on any movies or shows, and then physical modifications such as ramps or elevators, and then in general, having flexibility for time, space, and means. As it pertains to inclusive education, we can think of it as the practice of educating all students, including those with complex support needs, alongside their neurotypical peers in the general education classroom. Inclusive education is a way for students of all different abilities to learn and develop skills in one space with the appropriate supports that they need to be successful in school. Additionally, inclusion has been researched for more than 40 years across different countries, and there have been significant findings about its influence on student outcomes. So if we look at this visual, it just describes the possible educational environments ranging from inclusion, where students are directly or indirectly prevented from or denied access to education, to inclusion, which is a process that includes changes and modifications in content, teaching methods, approaches, structures, and strategies to help students overcome any barriers. When we look at federal law, specifically the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA, students are mandated to a free and appropriate public education. And specifically, this part describes that children with disabilities are educated in the least restrictive environment, with access to their general education peers to the maximum extent appropriate. So one key term here that we're going to talk about is the least restrictive environment. So the term environment can most commonly be interpreted as a place or a location, but in fact, least restrictive environment doesn't necessarily mean a particular setting. Rather, it involves identifying the level of support that a student needs. So if we look at this continuum of least restrictive environment, the top of the continuum, which is the least restrictive, would be a classroom with a general education teacher. We then can move into a classroom with accommodations and modifications. This can also include having an additional adult in the classroom. We also can have a level of support where the student is in the classroom with occasional pull-out services. So this could be possibly with an RSP program or receiving related services such as speech and OT, where students are spending most of their day with their general education peers. Another level of support could be having students learning in a separate classroom. This can commonly be known as a special day class, and sometimes there's specific labels depending on the student needs. For more restrictive environments, we can teach students in a separate school. We also have the option of home education or residential or institutional care. And this is on the continuum of more restrictive environment for student learning. So in terms of determination of least restrictive environment, it is individually determined by the student's IEP team to where the student will have access to the general education curriculum with necessary supports. So teams should prioritize student needs before placement and consider the level of support that the student needs to be successful. The least restrictive environment is not rigid or fixed. So as your child grows and learns new skills, that least restrictive environment can change depending on their needs at that current time. So how does inclusion tie into least restrictive environment? So inclusion is a philosophy that helps students achieve the least restrictive environment while also helping them gain access to the curriculum and their general education peers with adequate support. So we can think of least restrictive environment as the goal and inclusion as the path to get us to that goal. So inclusion models may have some or all of these components, including the special education and general education teacher collaboration piece. And this is important because each teacher can bring a level of expertise that can really help benefit students in the classroom setting by allowing for different accommodations and modifications to be used as appropriate. Inclusion models always try to have some level of exposure to grade level content. So, for example, if your student is a third grade student in an inclusion model, they will have access and exposure to third grade level content. Within the inclusion program, appropriate supports and accommodations can be used to promote engagement in the lessons. So all students are learning the same topic or lesson, but some different supports may be needed depending on the student needs. One key component of an inclusion model is providing support in the classroom, and this can be to help reduce disruptions in instruction and also allowing for more exposure to the general education curriculum as well as their peers. Another way to achieve inclusive models is through co-teaching, where again, two teachers are teaching the same lesson, or push-in models where possibly a special education teacher comes in for part of the day to do a lesson or to lead any small groups. So now that we've kind of covered what inclusion programs are and what they can consist of, it's really important to think about the possible benefits that these programs can bring our students. So we want to acknowledge that these programs can promote belonging and empathy. So this applies for both students with disabilities as well as their neurotypical peers. This can also lead to improved social benefits for all students, both in and out of the classroom. In addition to that, peer modeling and support can allow students to learn from their classmates and observe and practice key skills. Including all learners can also increase academic rigor, accompanied with differentiated instruction that again allows students to have access to the grade level content. So, some three important things to know about inclusion in school is that inclusive education has been researched, and it shows that children with and without disabilities do better academically, socially, and generally in life when they're able to participate in these classrooms. Inclusive education does not promote lowering the standard of education for other children. It may mean that students may have additional accommodations or supports to help them with that lesson. Inclusion is not a legal term and is not part of the law, but it is rather a philosophy about fully belonging to a community. And this can really allow kids to learn to live together and create a world that is better and safer for all students. So I wanted to address some common misconceptions to help address any unknowns surrounding this type of learning model. So the first common misconception is that academic standards will be lowered for my child who is not identified as having a disability. So as previously mentioned, students are learning grade level content with necessary supports. And all students are learning the same topic, but adjustments can be made, such as adapting the passage length, or possibly increasing visual aids or manipulatives for students as needed. The second common misconception is that only students with disabilities benefit from inclusion programs. So again, for students both with and without disabilities, there are numerous benefits that have been researched. And again, developing empathy and helping students understand that students can learn differently, but they can also be included within the school community. The third common misconception is that time will be taken away from instruction to help those access the lesson. So this idea is very common. However, when teachers are able to develop lessons with the needs of all students in mind, they may adopt a universal design for learning that allows for students from different levels to access the lesson. So again, this can mean possibly giving differentiated worksheets or allowing multiple means of showcasing student knowledge. So, when navigating an inclusive model for learning, it is important to keep these best practices in mind to give our children the greatest opportunity for success. So, we want to keep in mind that individual differences are not deficits and should be equally valued. So, as all students learn at their own pace, and just because a student doesn't quite know how to master a skill at this current time does not mean that they should not be valued and that they are not able to obtain those skills in the future. All students are capable of success. We always want to presume competence. Empathy is necessary for successful integration. So again, having students be exposed to all different types of learners can help develop that empathy. And with that empathy, students can feel safe in their learning and feel that they can accomplish what their peers are accomplishing. Teamwork makes the dream work. So not just with the students' school team, such as their teachers and staff, but also including you parents in this team decisions, as well as keeping that frequent communication so that we're able to understand what works best for your child. Differentiated instruction can make learning accessible. So just because all students are learning the same topic does not mean that they all have to have the same worksheets or the same test or quiz to showcase their learning. So being able to differentiate that can really help make learning accessible. And then lastly, we want to understand that special education is a service, it's not a placement. So as mentioned before, when going over the least restrictive environment, we want to keep our student needs first and the supports that are needed for them rather than strictly looking at placement. So, how can you engage your child at home? It is important to ask your child what their goals and their dreams are. So, this can help them develop a plan on how they can achieve their goals. It also allows you, as a parent, to help them celebrate their wins every step of the way when working towards that goal. You can also talk with them about learning differences. So, having a discussion about learning differences can help them develop empathy and understanding from their peers. We also want students to develop self-advocacy skills. So being able to speak up for themselves and tell their teachers or other support staff what they need to help them be successful. And not only does that give us as adults more information on how to help them, but it also allows them to build their confidence. Lastly, as a part of this training, I wanted to give you a couple of resources. So I'll go ahead and walk you through what these websites include. So the first is a resource video center. And with this comes different videos to help your child at home in terms of routines, talking with them about their progress, as well as different topics if you're interested. The second is a parent inclusion toolkit. And within this toolkit, we have different sections that go from talking about what inclusion is to inclusion in the law, how to develop goals, as well as collaborating with your school team. And then lastly is the Parent Center Hub, and that includes numerous resources such as Parent Center. So if you were interested about what resources were available in your community, you can click on a region and different resources can come up if you're interested in finding more specific support. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.